are standing up. Please come forward and fill in these seats in the middles of the rows. We want to keep the back seats open. So please come forward to the front part here. As close to the front as you can get is wonderful. We appreciate that. My name is Susan Alcorn, and I'm the coordinator for today's forum. Discussion titled Politics, Elections, and the Backfire Theory. Given this subject, we hope to challenge you with new thoughts and perspectives on issues that you'll continue to think about and maybe even act on. We have a mission in this church to search and to serve. We believe in the importance of keeping up with current events and issues and the importance of serving others. We organize these forums as a congregational service to the community to support personal reflection, social action, and individual and collective growth for all who attend. We chose today's topic for discussion because we're all anxious about the future of objective news, including the decrease in newspaper readership. We're also concerned about the growth of social media as the go-to news platform and all of the components of fake news and misinformation. We all know that democracy is at stake. We know what it's like to have good news reporting and commentary. That's why we've invited Brent Larkin, our guest here this morning, to be with us. Brent has an outstanding record as a journalist, a member of the Cleveland Press Club Hall of Fame. He's described by many as the undisputed dean of Cleveland and Ohio's political leadership, and as Cleveland's referee, analyst, and judge. Cleveland Magazine says that Larkin will go down as the last big power broker journalist. So, now, given all of these accolades, I'm hearing something. Do we need to adjust the microphone?
No. You're fine.
You're fine here. All right. Anyway, given all of these accolades, like a good journalist, I'm going to balance that information and share a story that Brent wrote himself about how he got into journalism. This is what he said. I was born in Cleveland and went to college at Ohio University. I was a terrible student. I had every bad habit in the world except for drugs. I didn't go to class. I graduated with a 2.3 average in an easy school. After graduation, I had a job interview at an employment agency here in Cleveland. So I get off the Shoreway Drive, and I'm really early. I turn left on East 9th Street, and there's the Cleveland Press Building. I had a degree in journalism, so I went in. What's to lose? I didn't even wait 15 minutes, and I got an interview. The managing editor was Dick Campbell, a graduate of OU. Dick Campbell loved Ohio University, and the newsroom was full of OU graduates. Dick Campbell never asked me anything that was relevant. After a brief interview, he said, "Come back here on January 2nd. That was in 1970, and that's how I got my job. There was no reason in the world that Campbell should have hired me." So, how's that for an introduction? It's balanced. Okay, fast forward. Starting in 1970, Brent Larkin covered Cleveland City Hall and politics at the Cleveland Press until 1981, when he joined the Plain Dealer. He got a law degree in 1986. From 1991 until he retired in 2009, he was the director of the Plain Dealer's editorial page. Now he writes columns for Cleveland.com. Just a quick question here. How many of you read The Plain Dealer with Brent Larkin's column? Larkin, I'm sorry. His column. Okay. How many love his columns? Okay, all right. This is our welcoming audience to you after your career in journalism. It's all yours.
Thank you, Susan. I never knew that I committed all those truths to writing about my. Where did you find that? I mean, it's true. Okay. No, it's true. I graduated with a degree in bad habits. And I've been called a lot worse in the last couple of years than Larson, so that's fine too. I was going to be here in January, right? It was January, and you were spared by the weather gods that intervened, and so I've kind of changed, if you will, if you don't mind, what I'm gonna talk about a little. That it's been, because it's now been 5 months since the election. I was going to talk about the 2018 election, and well, generally that isn't an especially long period of time. In Washington has kind of changed the clock on us in 5 months. In the last 5 months, we've had what, maybe 100 controversies and crises in our government lives. And the past few days, we've been attacking Barbara Bush, and a few weeks before that, we were attacking John McCain, and he has a fixation for deceased people. It's really kind of twisted, but I'll move on from there. But I want to talk a little bit about Ohio and where it stands in the political universe, because it was, in off-year elections, it's been a Republican-leaning state for the lifetime of everyone in this room. And when it comes to electing governors in Ohio, we are now a pretty red state. It's when 8 elections for governor are won by Republicans, and when 24 out of 28 years you have a Republican governor, that tends to be a pattern. But if ever there was a time when Democrats were poised to change that, it was 2018, because they had a decent slate of candidates. They raised a lot of money, and they had issues. They had an unpopular president. They had the health care issue, which bubbled up to bite the Republicans. And they had what to me was the most outrageous scandal in Ohio history, and that is something known as ECOT. And I've spoken to this group before, and you're always frightening because you're so well informed. And it was in a different room, was it not? But this is, this was more than $1 billion of our money was poured down a rat hole for a online charter school system, and that didn't educate children. And the Republicans were in on it because their campaigns received a lot of money from the founders. So they had all this going for them, and they still managed to lose five of 5 state executive offices. And it's because Ohio, in the last, perhaps since 2008, Ohio's shift to the right has been pretty dramatic. And I believe, for the first time again in the lifetime of anyone in this room, 2020 will probably be a flyover state. And there is no reason for candidates to spend a lot of time here when You have Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida are five states where the results are likely to be a lot closer than they will be in Ohio. And whoever wins 3 of those 5 states will be the next president. And Ohio will not, it's not that Ohio isn't a winnable state for Democrats. Holy cow, we've seen, Bill Clinton won it twice, Barack Obama won it twice, and it's predicted it's always close to the popular vote, always was, and the last time that Ohio differed from the winner of a presidential election was 1960, when Richard Nixon carried the state by a small margin. But in 2016, Hillary Clinton won by 2 points nationwide, and Donald Trump won by 8 points in Ohio. And that's a pretty dramatic difference, 10 points, and that kind of is I'm going to talk a little bit briefly later as to why that is, but Ohio's not a competitive state as of this moment in the presidential scheme of things. I want to move closer to home for a minute, and there's this Greek adage that it's an adaptation that I've kind of taken the liberty with to say, great leaders plant trees whose shade they know they will never live in. And perhaps many of you have heard that. And I'd like this morning to try and apply that a little bit to Greater Cleveland. And ask you if you can think of any leader in Greater Cleveland today who is planting those proverbial trees. And the answer, unfortunately, is an unequivocal no. So here we are. We have the nation's 51st largest city, down a mere 47 spots from 100 years ago when we were the 4th largest city. And sprawl is down 43 spots from just 60 years ago. So in sprawl, I've written this recently actually, sprawl is strangling us. Our tax base is evaporating, and there's no end in sight to that clear pattern that's been going on for now 50 or 60 years. There's a bunch of magical things happening in a lot of Cleveland neighborhoods, but the city and county's demographics are horrible. The people in charge now did not create that. It's part of a long time pattern. But the fact is we are too old, we are too poor, and we are too uneducated. And that is what is at the core of what right now holds this region back. And we have a workforce that is kind of it's utterly unable to compete with the 21st century economy. I think Tom Beyer has spoken to you before, has he not? He's a retired professor at the Cleveland State College of Urban Affairs. And he has done some recent research that I've written about. And here's kind of the Cliff Notes version of it. And the period I'm talking about here is from 1994 through 2017. And Bayer's research found that during that, 24-year period, Cleveland has, 23-year period. Cleveland has, Cleveland has lost $2.4 billion of its residential tax base. That's Cleveland. The inner ring suburbs lost $4.2 billion. Inner ring suburbs defined as the 18 communities that share a border somewhere with Cleveland. outside, the outer ring suburbs, if you will, they gained $2.9 billion. So overall, the county's tax base, residential tax base, has declined by $4.4 billion in 23 years. That's doesn't include the similar declines in commercial, in the value of commercial property and the value of industrial property. That's not sustainable. I've concluded for a few years now that if we were to wake up tomorrow morning and the Cleveland Clinic had disappeared, we would be Youngstown with some culture. Back in October, and perhaps you saw this, the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com paid a lot of attention to the fact that an attorney who was involved in convincing the RNC to bring the convention here, a guy named John Penny, he gave a well-publicized speech at the City Club in which he lamented Greater Cleveland's problems and promised to do something about it. And at the end of that speech, he kind of trampled all over his own message, and he named 8 potential change agents to deal with our problems, and all of them happen to be white males. And then he oops, and since then we've heard precious little from this group. The unwinding of the Greater Cleveland economy has been going on since the end of World War II, and I've come to believe that it's been accelerated by two periods. People ask me if I would ever consider writing a book, and aside from the fact that people don't read books anymore, and local books are really tough to generate interest in. The only person I know who's made a lot of money, journalist on books, was Dick Fagler, and he was unique, and he wrote 3 books, and only one of them made a lot of money. But anyways, but that's an aside. The worst, if I were to write something, it would be on the worst decade in the city's history, and I believe, without question, the worst decade in Cleveland's history, Greater Cleveland's history, was the 70s. And you had the beginning of the don't hold me to these figures, but at the beginning of the decade, Cleveland had about 760,000 residents. At the end of the decade, it had 595,000 residents. And I didn't look at the county figures, but I'm sure they were not as bad. But it began with the first mayor's race I ever covered was in 1971, and there was a bunch of candidates in the race, and Carl Stokes was very much involved in trying to manipulate the race, and the result was the election of Ralph Perk, who was mayor for the first half of the decade, and he was a decent man, shrewd politician, campaigned as a former ice salesman who gave away more ice than he sold, and he was a Republican, and he was a nice man who was a horrible mayor. He set the table, refused to ask voters for any tax increases, set the table for default. He was succeeded, as most of you probably know, by Dennis, and who kind of gave the town the nervous breakdown, and who, I think history, he would argue, and not altogether wrongly, that he was right on the issues, some of the issues, and he was, but the substance was went horribly wrong. When, there was a constant fighting, confrontation. Does it sound familiar? We lost a lot of companies in the midst of his mayoralty. The desegregation order began to be implemented. He had nothing to do with that, but it ignited this period of white and black flight from the city. And downtown emptied out. If you remember downtown in the late 1970s, it was nightmarish.
Yeah.
Because the department stores were leaving, you know, buildings on Euclid Avenue began to be boarded up. The 70s put it on fast forward, and we kind of righted things in the 1980s, and George Winovich was a very responsible fiscal manager, and downtown got better, and still no one paid attention to the deteriorating school system. Then came the housing crisis, and that was precipitated by the Great Recession of 2007, 8, and 9, and when one neighborhood in Cleveland became the worst zip code in the United States for foreclosures, Slavic Village, and the blight spread well beyond Cleveland's borders. It infected a lot of suburbs and exacerbated the urban rot, and people, that recession planted in the seeds of many minds a feeling that the system wasn't fair, the system is rigged, in a way parts of it are, and if you fast forward to 2016, that was the main reason that the result was what it was. But there are some real bright spots in going on, a couple real bright spots going on in our government right now. We have this Say Yes to Cleveland, which is a scholarship program for young kids, for the Cleveland schools, which I would argue is halfway there, because you also, you know, there's poor people in other cities in Cuyahoga County, and this program is limited to Cleveland. I think they need to try and raise the money to broaden it. And early childhood, which to me is investments in children, and early education is the best way to try and break this cycle of poverty that has infected so many urban areas. The first county executive, Ed Fitzgerald, poured some more money into that. Armin Budish has poured a lot more money into it. And Mike DeWine is actually one of, I did not vote for Mike DeWine. I'm bothered by some of his social policies, by his policy on guns, by his policy on gays. Mike DeWine has planted some of those trees I've referred to in the areas of children. His budget has poured more money into children than the budget of any governor in our lifetime, again. And that's something he will not be governor, and probably may not live to see the fruits of that. But those are the types of investments that Greater Cleveland and Ohio need more of. And let me go back to where I began. By the way, I think Mike DeWine will be a better governor than John Kasich, and I don't even think it will be close, because he's more normal. He is probably, you know, he's most Governor Kasich's most unpopular with people who know him best, and those are Ohio's Republicans. But I don't want to go up on it. But I want to go back to just a word on the least like him. I walked into Corky and Lenny's on Tuesday night to, do a little presentation with another group of people whose similar demographics to us. And a fellow about my age comes up to me and he said, you know, I know you've been doing this a long time, but you don't seem to be as angry, you seem to be more angry now than you were. And may I ask why that happened? And I said, you're right. I am. And why it happened is because November 8th, 2016 happened. And so I'm gonna keep my Trump rant brief this morning, because you never know how many people you're gonna anger, although in this room, my guess is you're not gonna anger too many. But we need leaders who look forward, not leaders who promise that they're going to turn back time. And Donald Trump was elected on a promise that he will take us back to our, and it's just not going to happen. It's impossible. And he won't do it. And on that day that I have that hang up about, we elected, you know, a genuinely despicable human being. And can you imagine if Barack Obama had done 1% or said 1% of the things that this man has done? I mean, we have a president whose policies will destroy seem designed to destroy planet Earth, who has bragged about sexually assaulting women, whose, you know, abject cruelty to people living and dead, stain the presidency, who supports caging children. I could go on and on, but you get the point. But if you look back, and if you go back to the period of the unwinding of the Midwest economy, this is a byproduct of what's happened, and if as we look forward to next year, I'm not overly confident that we're going to be pleased with the result. I would highly recommend, if you can find it, reading Peggy Noonan's column in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. She's a conservative, she's a Reagan Republican, very thoughtful, does not like the president, very Republican. It was a really masterful piece on where she thinks this thing may be headed. Are we in the early stages of democracy's unwinding? I don't know, but I fear that we might be. And on that happy note, I'll wrap this. Let you folks always have really insightful questions. And I'm not running away from talking about the plain dealer or journalism problems. It's just that I'm not an employee there, and these are tough times in the newspaper business. And the papers that are suffering the most are not the big national papers, because a few of those are experiencing a windfall in subscription increases, nor the little small town daily. It's the big regional newspapers that are suffering the most. And this one is the one in Cleveland is suffering. Also, it's made worse by the fact that we have bad demographics. We have an uneducated population, and that contributes to it. But I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Just a few things here. I'm going to pass this clipboard around, and if you aren't receiving our email reminders about forums, sign up and take the brochure if you wish. And we have 3 rules for questions. You've heard me say this before. One is to keep your questions short, no speeches. One is to, what?
Said good luck on that.
Okay, all right. So anyway, we just want to, keep the, conversation going here among reasonable, ways. So that's it.
Sure.
And our microphone holders will, choose the questions.
My question is, although I voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and would do again, my sense is that the results of the 2018 election for Democrats were that moderate Democrats in suburban districts are the people who gave the Democrats their majority in the House. I don't know if you agree with that logic, but if you do or if you don't, how do you see the 2020, not the presidential election, but the congressional and Senate elections going?
I don't know is the short answer, and the map for in the Senate is a little friendlier than it was in 2018. I think a lot of it depends on how the presidential election unfolds. Can I say something about Sanders? If you, I don't like him. He has accomplished nothing in the Senate. I can't. There is a Senate staffer who I can't tell you who he is. I spoke to him on Thursday about something else. He is way up there on the food chain. If I told you his title, you would agree with me. He told, and I brought up the Sanders, and he immediately said, I'm not going to use all the words that we both said, that he is by far the most unpopular Democrat in the United States Senate, because he gets nothing done, but aside from that, he's too old to run for president again, I think.
More unpopular
Than who? No, Democrats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you, as always.
yeah, I
for the
think Cruz
presentation.
is really, pardon me, yes,
Thank
sir.
you again for your wonderful presentation. I'm OU class of '67, and in spite of
Okay,
what you
good
said
for
about
you.
busy school, Larkin, Esther Haas, and Fager were my three writers in Cleveland as far as
And
journalism.
there were some other big ones who ended up rooting Max, help me on that, but anyway,
Yeah,
but there
good.
was.
Is there any bright light that you see in the political races? A council person, a business person, a county administrators, anyone you see as having promise for political future in Cleveland?
Well, I think the really interesting race is gonna be the next mayor's race. And the mayor's wife is ill, and that's been written just a little bit, and it's a major and then you're, in the mayor's race, you're going to have a choice between, there's 6 or 7 different candidates that might offer a different way of governing, where you have where you can articulate a vision for the city, and the council president, Kevin Kelly, and Matt Zone, and the name is Chris Ronayne has been floated, but Nina Turner, who is high up in the Sanders campaign, a guy named Blaine Griffin. If we're going to have a lead, the next big local election is in 2021, and perhaps a genuine leader will emerge from that group. It's too early to tell. I'm sorry to kind of beg off on it. Yes, sir?
A question to your legal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Another OU guy,
Oh,
also
great.
also 67,
Oh.
and which is probably why I'm confused. I've said for years, I don't understand why Republicans seem to do well with the electorate when you look at their position on the poor, immigration, minorities, women, supporting the rich over the poor. It seems like the populace is voting against their own benefit. And I was wondering if you had a comment on that.
Well, the typical Republican, the Republican voter is older and whiter and maybe it's, I do understand it. I think race is a factor in maybe more of a factor than we'd like to admit. And the thing is, the Republican base, its days are numbered. And because the country is changing, even though they are not, the party is not, and it might not be 2020, it might be eventually they're gonna run out of numbers. And women, the gender gap is huge. It was at least 6 points in the last election, and women aren't going anywhere. You know, old Republican males, white males are, but they're still gonna, the electorate's always gonna be, 52, it's about 53% right now of the electorate. And that's why I think, the Republican Party cannot sustain this, because the country's not as white as it's been, and that's gonna change with every election. Yes.
Okay, this one is, more to your legal training. This one is more to your legal training.
You got to, okay.
David Sicking from, I came from Case Institute, which is now part of Western Reserve, Case Western Reserve. And the question is, if Congress passes a document, both houses, that is clearly, by the language of the Constitution and its provisions, prohibited and therefore not in the power of those bodies to enact. Okay, and it goes up the chain to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upholds this document. Is it law, or has the Supreme Court committed malfeasance and dereliction of duty, and it's really not law because the document says they can't make it?
Well, David, if you're relying on my legal expertise to answer that, you've asked the wrong person. I have a law degree, I have a license to practice law. I am no more qualified to practice law than anyone else in this room, because I never did it.
Yes,
I got a law degree, or a license, and I put it on a shelf, so. But I guess the answer is, I'm not sure if, the answer would be that what the law is whatever the Supreme Court says it is.
But that's not what it says. There's nothing in there that it says it's the last place of appeal, and the next thing down is the right to be armed.
And you may be right about that, but I know nothing. I'm a very poor. I'm not a lawyer.
Yes, but they submit themselves to the Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
Do you have preferred Democrat candidates for
Yeah,
president,
I would vote.
President and vice president in 2020?
Just because I'm that angry old man that guy at Corky and Lenny's asked me about. If the election were today in Ohio, the primary, I would vote for the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Wow.
Who would you?
Wow.
Who would
I've asked to go see him, and I think I've used some of my old connections to ask to go see him. And I think I'm gonna be successful in the next couple of weeks, but he's 37 years old, he speaks 7 languages. 7 languages more than the present president. I'm for him, he's smart as hell. Is he gonna be worse? No, He would be better, I mean, his back, he raised his hand and said, I wanna go to Afghanistan and help our, you know, come on. I mean, he's a Rhodes Scholar.
Mm-hmm.
He's done some things in South Bend, which is a, you know, kind of like, my son went to school there. The town is very different than the college, trust me. The town has got a lot, it's like Lorraine. And he's done some proactive things to actually make things better. So why not? I'm for him.
Okay,
Yes,
right
ma'am.
here, on another matter. This area has suffered because of a lack of a regional approach for
Yes.
decades.
Yes.
Balkanization of all these different communities. Do you see any path toward changing that?
I'm not overly, you know what I think it's gonna, look, everyone knows, you're 100% right. There's two ways, it seems to me, to approach it. One way is metro government. St. Louis is gonna vote on it next year. They will go from 53rd to 10th if it passes, in terms of, you know, you eliminate, metro government would be, the city of Cleveland would be the entire county. And you could, St. Louis is gonna do it in a way where you get to keep your local school systems, because that's the one thing that could absolutely kill it. And you get all these layers of government would disappear. You know, in Greater Cleveland, we have 55 mayors or township trust, and we have 50-some, you know, police department. It's preposterous. A better way may be, because we've already lost so many residents, maybe a tax sharing proposal where if you steal, Solon loves to steal business, that's just one example. They love to steal businesses from Cleveland or South Euclid, and where if you do that, you have to give back 50% of your gains to, some of that would bring some equality into the tax base. I am of the opinion that nothing will happen in Greater Cleveland, that something really bad has to happen. And it will happen. Really bad being defined as something the people who live here think is really bad. And I think it will take the loss of a sports team. I know that sounds kind of, but I'm serious about it. I'm really serious about it. We're gonna have to lose a sports team before people figure out we're in trouble. And I'm right, I really think I'm right. And I fear that it will be.
Which one?
Well, who knows, the one that generates the most dollars for downtown in the city of Cleveland is the team that plays the most games there in warm weather. You know, the one team we'll never lose is the Browns, because people have this kind of demented relationship with them, and I mean that, and I used to have it. But they play 8 Sunday afternoons a year.
Yeah.
8. But it doesn't matter. But that will be the wake-up call when we lose a sport, because at the rate we're going, having 3 teams is not sustainable. And I fear it would be the Indians that we would lose, but who knows? Yes, ma'am? No?
Over here.
Oh, hi, Amy. Oh, I didn't see you here.
Thanks, Brent. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned 3 things. We're too old, too poor, too uneducated.
Yes.
And those are all really big problems. If you were running the show, how would you address it, given that county and city resources have been limited due to state cuts and lack of new revenues due to the population fleeing?
That's a good question, because obviously I'm struggling for an answer. I would try and make universal pre-K I would try and make pre-K, quality pre-K universal for every needy child in the county. We are, as I noted a few minutes ago, we are making incremental progress on that. I would make, again, if I would try and make community college free, Tri-C free, and I would try and tailor the curriculum to preparing the workforce for jobs that are consistent with the 21st century economy. And I would try and adapt one of those 3 tax sharing or metro government, one of those 2 ideas that I floated. And I did not talk about our workforce, but it's all related to the same thing. Our workforce cannot compete in the 21st century. So those are the 3 things I would, and I would try, at some point you would have to ask the taxpayers to help pay for that. I understand all that. And if all you can do, you know, maybe you can throw some incentive in there for the Browns, and to make it, I'm being half jesting, but that's the net, we need government to invest more. And you also need a private sector that's involved in that too, because they're the ones that create jobs more than I'm not totally unsympathetic with a lot of Republican principles. The private sector has to be at the table also.
I want to return to the national scene just a moment. If we are in agreement that the current administration is an aberration,
is or is not?
Is, and that there's much talk about the base, do you think that after the aberration is over, after Agent Orange is no longer there, will the Republican Party find its voice again in American politics?
That's a great question, and I think that's very problematic at this point. Isn't it hard to see them going back to what? It's really hard. But getting back to that, the most important thing the Democrats need to do, this is really simplistic, is nominate someone who is likable.
Yeah, right.
It's really important. And because she was unlikable. She was 1,000 times more qualified than it, maybe 1,000,000 times. And her IQ's probably 50 points higher than his. But Hillary Clinton had been around too long. She had been in our face since 1992. And over time she was the right wing was largely effective in demonizing her. And she wasn't likable. And they will demonize they'll demonize Bernie Sanders if he is the nominee, and they're already trying out their socialist tag, and they talk about that a lot now, and they will do, and we know that he will do or say anything to.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that Joe Biden's affectionate nature will be of any significance?
Well, I think it's I almost said something. I think it's baloney. It's again. I refer you back to Peggy Noonan yesterday. She talked about this Republican columnist talked about what a decent and caring man he is, and how the far left is demonizing him, and most people in Washington blame the Sanders campaign for doing that. I honestly think he's too old to be president.
Yes.
But, and he will begin the race atop the polls, but the question is, will he add to that? Probably not. He'll never be more popular than he is the day he announces. And so, we need somebody who's more popular, who grows in popularity. This kid from South Bend, Buttigieg, we're all gonna have a hard time with that one if he sticks around. But you need somebody who might be more likable. Yes, ma'am.
I have a number of friends who are worried that the Democrats are becoming too radical because of the Green New Deal, and supporting Medicare for all, and a lot of socialistic, which Bernie Sanders says, but what the rest of the world has actually, but America does not. And I'm wondering what your opinion is.
I think that from a political, I have no problem with it. I'd give up $1,000 less a year to try and fund all these ideas. But I do think politically it is problematical for them because they will be demonized. And this socialist, they tried to stick that on Obama, that he's a socialist, but I do think that some of these newer members of Congress have to weigh it, rein things in a little bit, or they're gonna end up with more of the same. Yes, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry.
In your view, is it conceivable that a local community, all these municipalities individually, can maintain themselves without the industrial base they've gotten rid of?
Well, that's what we don't have, but, we have, I missed the big thing and she's gone, but our biggest asset is probably our fresh water.
Yes.
6 quadrillion gallons of it floating right by. There's a guy named David Morgenthaler. People know who he was. Venture capitalist, billionaire who lived here, and Dick Celeste, who is a very, very bright guy. They both, if you would have asked them, or if you would ask one of them today, what is our biggest strength? And they would both instantly say it's our water. We have to figure out how we build an economy around it, because the rest of the world and a lot of parts of this country are running out of it. And John McCain introduced a bill at one point that would have authorized the federal government to take water from the Great Lakes. It didn't get anywhere, but it's coming. The invasion, they're gonna try and take our water at some point because the southeast and the southwest are drying up. And we have to figure out a way, like Milwaukee is doing, I'm doing hundreds of millions of dollars in trying to do exactly that. And we are not. Yes,
I'd just like to get your perspective on Tim Ryan's entry into the race. Different pros and the cons.
He's a nice guy, he's a smart guy, he's good looking, he fits the Robert Redford, thing of a candidate, and he's from the right part of the country, actually. He's from a part that has really suffered, and remember when Donald Trump went to Youngstown? Don't sell your house, he yelled. Those jobs are coming back here. Well, they should have sold their house because the jobs have, it's worse. It's gonna be far worse off. So Ryan's from a good place, he has a good message. I'm not sure he's, careful here, this is on YouTube, right? I'm not sure, not sure he's hefty, has enough heft to be in with some of these groups. Let me tell, that's a bad way to talk. Can you imagine if he was the speaker today as opposed to, he would have gotten run over by this clown. And, you know, the Democrats have the best speaker imaginable. She's tougher than he is, she's smarter than he is. And as you know, John Ryan wanted to be speaker. He tried to take her out as majority leader 2 years ago. And thank goodness he failed. Does that answer it, kind of? Thanks.
I guess I'm next. I was wondering what you thought about some of these state legislations to take away local control from communities and, you know, initiatives.
The legislature, with the cooperation of the Supreme Court, has been busy at work, eviscerating the Home Rule Amendment to the Ohio Constitution, which was adopted sometime in the early 1900s, I think. And you know, they prohibited local communities from enacting gun laws and a bunch of stuff that I'm bothered by. There is no, they have really weakened the local control provision of the home rule provision, so I'm bothered by it. You know, they may try and do something on plastic bags. I saw the county councils.
Right. They're gonna, be voting on that, and they might wanna put that local control stuff in before we get a chance.
Yes.
Back to, water.
Right, okay.
I have, I read the book, The Death and Life of, Lake Erie.
Is it good? Mike,
Yes, it's very
Mike
good.
Schwartz, a former president of CSU, sent it to me last week, and he recommended it. It's good.
Yeah, it's a provocative book, and it gives a lot of the detail that you recognize the work already that has gone into the lake. But my question, I read it a while ago, and it seemed to recall that it concluded that if we close the St. Lawrence Freeway, that we're getting fewer and fewer ships in, that things are coming by truck and by air, not nearly as much by ship. And it's bringing in all these foreign invaders that we're having so much trouble. In the bilge water that they released. What do you think about that idea? It sounds radical at first, but.
Of what, closing
the St. Lawrence Freeway.
Seaway.
Waterway.
I don't know enough about it. I really don't. But you've convinced me that I should move that book up to that next. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. No legal questions. No, go ahead. Yes, sir.
A quick evaluation of the Obama administration.
Where are we?
Right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A quick evaluation of the Obama administration.
Boy, don't they look pretty good right now?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, the rap on Obama is that he missed a lot of opportunities and he was too cautious. And I think the flip side to that and one that I would probably subscribe to, is that, hey, he did what he could and he moved the ball a little bit, and more people have health care today because of him than did when he took office. And so, you know, I thought given the obstacles before him, and given the historic nature of his presidency, I think he did not one scandal, was there, in 8 years. Now we have one Did you have an AM scandal and a PM scandal? Not one in 8 years. What a difference. And I think, I really, some people also blame him for what happened, but I think the roots of what happened in 2016 were really planted, or took hold in 2008, because the economy winded, and people who lost their jobs, who got jobs back, they're making half of what they were. And that's why people are angry.
Climate work too, climate change.
Sure.
So, I just have this may be a weird question. I've had more and more difficulty talking to good friends who are on the other side of the political spectrum. I just can't get a conversation going, because to me, they seem to have a very closed mind. They probably think the same of me, my guess is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had that feeling, and do you have any thoughts on how we can get people together to talk more civilly, more cooperatively, or are we just faced with this, you're either with us or you're against us mentality?
Boy, that's a great question, because there have been stories about people changing the date of their wedding to a date where they knew some people they didn't want, some Trump people, were going to be out of town. And there have been, I swear to you this is true. We were in a Jeep on the way to Victoria Falls in Zambia, and our guide talked about he was based in Botswana, and they're not burdened by any of the troubles that we are. He said, "What's going on in your country? I had 2 people in my Jeep last week. They made me pull over, and 2 of them got out. They were arguing about your president." I swear to you that. I have 2 people, one who was a very good friend of mine from Ohio University, whom we don't speak anymore.
Oh my.
And I must, in the interest of honesty, I think it is more my decision. I know it is more my decision than his. Life's too short. I just don't want to have to deal with these people, so I don't. But it really is. It's kind of sad. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel, and there's some other people who I knew that I don't talk to anymore. They were not. I don't want to call them friends, but they were close. So I just don't want to deal with them.
I need some clarification. In the early part of your talk, you mentioned that it would be, you implied that it would be a good idea for all these various municipalities to condense in some manner. But
yes.
But just a few minutes ago, you were lamenting the fact that certain organizations were chipping away at the rights of these individual municipalities, and you were lamenting that. So those 2 points seem to be opposing in my mind.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. The second one, I was talking about state government.
Ah.
State government is taking away either by law or by Ohio Revised Code or through the Supreme Court. They are eroding the powers of local governments to govern themselves. But my original thing was talking about eliminating 55 municipalities and all operating under one roof.
But the state activities will indeed force the local things to merge because they don't have the powers anymore.
Well, I would hope that you're right, but it hasn't That doesn't and that does make some sense, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And I think if you put something on the ballot in Cuyahoga County saying now you're all part of Cleveland, I think it would almost certainly fail, but I think it's worth trying and worth trying to add enough incentives to convince people to rethink it.
You mentioned earlier the education gap for Ohio, and I'm not sure it's only in Ohio, but as of about 1983, anybody who did not sign up to be called to carry out actions against their religious beliefs and would refuse to sign up for that were prohibited of getting any aid help from the federal government for Pell Grants, student loans, any of the scholarships, anything of that sort, and unless they acquiesced to be called in to carry out war crimes, what they would consider immoral and war crimes. That, as far as I know, is still in effect. How much effect does that have on the profile of the types of people coming out of colleges and their willingness to resort to violent solutions to problems, like the immigration war?
I don't, do you really think they're coming out of colleges?
The ones that go through have signed up.
Okay.
If they use any public support.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that it's worth worrying about the Supreme Court going forward, continuing to condone or make excuses for what could only be described as discrimination based on gender and race
and it is the poor areas that supplied so many of the people who ended up maimed and killed in Vietnam and subsequent places, and many of those probably are not signing up, other than the ones that look at it and say, this middle 80s ad, get the education you didn't get in school in the Army.
Sure. Right.
I'd like to follow up on this gentleman's question about civil discourse. We had an excellent presentation on March 24th by John Vitkus, a psychologist from Cleveland Clinic, on that precise topic. I believe that presentation is still available on YouTube, and a number of us have copies of his elaborate PowerPoint presentation, if anybody would like to see it.
John, you said Vic?
John Vitkus. He's a psychologist, or he may not.
Okay. Thank you.
We have time for about one more question here before we will resolve. One more question.
Go ahead.
I just wonder what you thought about the move to amend, people, if that has a chance.
The move to amend what? I'm sorry.
Move to amend, corporate, personhood issues and elimination of their too much power in political area and governance practice.
Well, are you talking about in contributions or the Citizens United? Yeah, I would. They do have too much power in terms of, a bigger concern for me is all the dark money that is. Has anybody read that book, by the way, about the Koch brothers? It's phenomenal. It reads like a novel. Yeah, it's a problem. I agree with you.
You have to change the Constitution.
Yeah, good luck with that, though, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so very much. We certainly appreciate it. This must be your third or fourth time with us.
Oh, yeah.
Third, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we appreciate that so very much.
Come back
Now,
soon and
I
all.
do have some announcements here, so please stay in your seats. We will not have a forum next Sunday. That is our breakfast Sunday for our community breakfast. And if you like to talk and discuss over coffee and a full breakfast, it's a very good opportunity to meet new friends and participate in more discussion. The Sunday after that is Easter, and so we will not have a forum on Easter. But the Sunday after that is our April 28th, and let's be quiet, please, here. On April 28th, our forum is titled Community Investment and Resilience, Shaker Square's Future. Speakers will include Peter Rubin, president of the Coral Company, the owner of Shaker Square, and Tiffany Graham, senior project director of Land Studio. LAND stands for Landscape, Art, and Neighborhood Development. That will be a good forum. You are all invited. The other thing I wanted to mention is YouTube. You can get a copy of this discussion this morning by going to www.youtube.com. Search for UU Congregation of Cleveland. We also have a sign with this on it, UU Congregation of Cleveland. I will now introduce Reverend Joe Cherry, who will discuss our church service upstairs.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to welcome everyone to come to church when you can. We're open every Sunday at 11. That's my heavy sales press right there. Today we're going to talk about completion and endings of things and how that can be awkward for folks. There won't be a forum on Easter, but we'll be talking, I'm going to be reaching back to a minister who was minister of the congregation in the 1870s and sort of commenting on his sermon for Easter that year. So I hope that you will find that interesting and consider yourselves welcome. And today is a bonus, if you stay, we have a community potluck afterward, which is always a big hit. So you're welcome anytime. Please feel free.
Good presentation. That's all. Brent Larkin is articulate. Of course, he believes everything I believe.
Oh, having very nice.
You have to read that, No, we don't take the walk. We go to the library.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. Okay. So I that's sad.
Oh, yeah. In spite of what anybody says, easy school, free school,
yeah, but we love it.
And I read Unity before.
Well, I was
you know, law no, it's in English. It took several years. Interestingly enough, Chris was not the subject matter of Rocky River Life. So we are he was treated before I went out.
and room for women.
2 years it took. Second row was very different. But I think you are. Spelling and everything else.
my daughter.
They wanna look at this little screen.
Now comes the white sheet. Lay down.
That's our Sunday interview. I can change the and I walked it in.
So what'd you get on the paper?
I handed it to him, and he looked, and he knew that I was
Yeah. And I still am. I'm still a good one. I went to try C on Fridays, and the guy said, "Well, you're the writer." I said, "Yeah."
I have my
I'm not good.
I have 4 things that I say you need to
Writing one up. When you try your first wish I were there. I would like to
first 4 classes but the most important ones on the teacher. You may think that you're going to be in this area for the rest of your life.
Changes that when I was graduating, 5 years was typical for changing job, and 12 years is typical for changing career.
I used to say,
12 years.
reinvent yourself every 7 years. And now you have to reinvent yourself every
Even quicker, that's right. As soon as Microsoft comes out with a new version. Excellent form, too.
But at least I can get this. We won't have to go to long. Oh, but it's is that your number here? You get the 991-7968. When I called you, 3:34 p.m. Well, now I know. And her ex-husband, they're married anymore, he came after she had film, and he did this. And I mean, isn't that great? He loves it. You know, they all love it. It's so good. Touch that. The older we get, the more help we have to find. It's a good thing it's available. And it is. We've been lucky. So you are in the email at the moment. We all have our hearts. Oh, red, okay, I don't know, what did you see, what color Bob's was, I don't know. Alright.
He takes credit for all the.
Right. Because one of these buttons down here takes the main screen, the bottom looks like I just take it. Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out why we have red and they have green.
Oh, I'm the person who writes the checks. No, she had 6 colors, I think, or 4.
I think it depended on which color card the distributors got in their hand when they were putting out the cards.
Just a random choice.
Yeah.
You're all going to sit in the front.
Yeah.
Right.
The color doesn't make any difference. The presence of it is a significant picture.
Yeah, we had to blow the dust off ours.
Yeah.
That's right, it's been sitting there. Right, we all got the they didn't put your old name on it. Oh, all right.
I had the occasion at that funeral service yesterday.
At the society.
At the society building. We go there for the first time, so.
I was pleasantly surprised. We went over there, before we left for the winter.
Yeah.
That's a nice building.
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be a 1926 building.
Well, it probably is, but if you look at the back doors, the back doors have holes in them.
Oh dear.
Gunshots?
No, but the wood lattice work in the back doors is old and wearing, and there are gaps between. You can see right out. So the back end of the building needs some help. Yeah. Well, our new congregation owns the building, of course. So we now have two buildings.
Yeah.
And so occasionally we had activities at the other building, and this gentleman wanted his memorial service to take place in the original building if possible. So that's why they did it. Because he was a member of that church.
Is the church building down in the city, what is that, 86th or 87th Street, something like that?
82nd Street.
Does the building still exist down there?
I don't know. One in the corner of the lobby of the current building that I was in yesterday, there's a piece of concrete mortar that looks like part of a building. So that made me suspect that maybe the only remaining piece of that building, they took that as a remembrance of the original building. Yeah. I'll see you upstairs.
Yeah, I guess what time is it now? We like to go and hear the music.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Well, a lot of the boards that are voting these honorary salaries are people that are in themselves figures that somebody was voting to me. So it's a vicious cycle that just keeps
The philosophy is when you look at that, math has been very surprising for
but the more space that here we have, that doesn't mean the math Jewish group, merger potential guys. He was the murderer. And I wondered, what was going to happen. And of course,
activities
2 years
go on because that's the only way you're going to make a change. The municipalities aren't going to change until they're forced to. So we're going to have to go through something like that.
Hi, Bobcat.
Yeah, nice to see you. Unbelievable. Where'd you get that at? I made it up. Okay. I bought them for my family for the holiday. Yeah, somebody gave me a picture of Obama president. I don't care if it's got it. It's good. My daughters are good. We take our son online. Give the money. Really? Yeah. There you go. You know, I wear it a lot. I try to yeah, but mostly positive.
I'm playing for something else, but I will.
One guy offered $3 for so your daughters are going to,
Audio amazingly well today. Didn't have to go in the back and.
I know. I don't know what happened. Something's wrong.
Oh, really?
Well, no. I mean, if